Learning Objective 2 also discusses the accounting rate of return. So this is our second tool that we can use in analyzing capital investment decisions that, once again, does not utilize the present value assumptions. So when we're talking about the accounting rate of return, we're simply looking at, instead of cash flows that we were looking at in the payback method, we're going to look at profitability. How profitable is this investment? And so our calculation here is simply, what is our average annual operating income? And so not cash flows, but operating income. And then we're going to look at the average amount that we have invested. So we need to understand how to calculate these two averages. Now, let me just back up quickly to say that this is the accounting rate of return, and you may sometimes hear it referred to as the average rate of return or something along those lines. It is very similar to the return on investment calculation that we looked at for investment centers. However, the return on investment calculation covers a one-year period for a return on our assets. The accounting rate of return is looking at an average return over the useful life of whatever particular investment you are considering. So there is a little bit of a difference here, but the same concept in these calculations. So we have to determine what this annual operating income is for an organization. So with Smart Tabs, what we will look at is, what are their total cash inflows during the life of the asset? These are revenues, that income that we think they will be bringing in. But this is based on the accrual method of accounting. So we're going to back out any non-cash expenses that could be part of those operations. So we're going to back out depreciation. And we're estimating what depreciation is going to be over the life of the asset, and it is simply the cost less the residual value. Once again, if you'll think back to financial accounting, you never depreciate an asset below its residual value. So whenever we're backing out depreciation, we aren't going to depreciate the residual value of the machine. And that's why we have cost less residual value for depreciation here. That will calculate for us the total operating income that we expect to recover from this machine over its useful life. And then we will divide that amount by the asset's useful life. How many years do we think it's going to operate, or will we use it in operations, to calculate our average annual income from that asset? So in the case of Smart Tab, if we look at the B2B portal, information, their cash flows were expected to be $60,000 per year and for 6 years. So that's $360,000, and we want to back out any depreciation of $240,000. They had remember the B2B portal did not have a residual value, so we would completely depreciate the $240,000 over the useful life. So we are estimating that we would be bringing in $120,000 of income over the operating life of this asset. We said it had a 6-year estimated life, which will generate an average annual operating income of $20,000 per year. So if I know the average annual operating income of $20,000, I would simply divide it by, and once again, it's not the amount invested, it is the average amount invested. And the average amount invested is simply the amount you paid for the asset, less the residual value divided by 2. We don't have a residual value here. And so, I'm sorry, the amount you invested plus the residual value, because that you can recover, divided by 2. We didn't have a residual value in the B2B, so it is simply half of our original investment of $240,000. That's $120,000. So our average, our accounting rate of return on this particular asset is 16.7%. How do we know if that's good or bad? This all depends on what what Smart Tab's minimum required accounting rate of return is for investments. If their minimum accounting rate of return is 20%, this would not be a recommended investment. If it's 15%, then yes, possibly we could look at this option. So let's look at what happens with the Z80 portal when we do have different amounts of income coming in through the period, and we do have a residual value. Still, when we're calculating our average annual operating income Okay, we're looking at the cash flows that are being generated by this asset, and we want to know the total. So even though these were coming in at different amounts for different years, 100,000, 80,000, 60,000, we simply want the total amount of cash inflows over the useful life or operating life of the asset, which was 360,000. Then we want to back out, once again, depreciation, and that is simply, we started with a $240,000 investment. It has a $30,000 residual value, so we're only going to depreciate $210,000 worth of this machine or investment or portal. Okay, so if I take my cash flows less my depreciation, my total operating income that I think I'm going to generate over the useful life of this asset is $150,000, and we think we'll use it 6 years. So now my average annual operating income is $25,000 compared to the $20,000 that we had with the B2B. So we've got a $25,000 average annual operating income, and we're going to divide by the average amount invested. Now this time we do have a residual value, so this is going to be the same 240. We're calculating the average amount invested. It is simply our $240,000 that we have invested in this asset plus the $30,000 residual value divided by 2, and this generates an average amount invested of $135,000. Now we have an 18.5% return on investment. Now this is good information for us to compare the 18.5% to the 16.7% that was generated by the B2B. But even without these numbers, we could tell that even though they're generating revenue over the same period, we have more revenue coming in. We have additional profits coming in from the Z80 than we do the B2B. And when we look at these with the net present value in consideration, we have larger amounts of cash being returned to us earlier, which means that we have some additional time to turn around and reinvest that cash if we so decide. So we could really see without these calculations that the Z80 looks like it might be a better return, but once we put the calculations together, we can certainly see that in the percentage calculations that we have here. Okay. Once again, what's our basic decision rule for the accounting rate of return? If our accounting rate of return meets or exceeds whatever required minimum has been established by our organization, then we could consider investing in this particular capital asset. But if it is less, then are we expecting too high of a rate of return, or simply no, this is not an investment that we need to take on at this particular time? Once again, payback method and the accounting rate of return are great tools to use in beginning our analysis of capital investment decisions, but they do have some limitations, and we do need to be sure that we are using them for screening or just quick decisions, and not necessarily as our only tools to use for some very significant capital investment decisions.